it's Adam here with Retro Repairs, and this is part 2 of my Sharp Twin Famicom series. So I picked this guy up on eBay recently. It was purchased as untested, so I'm going to show you quickly what it does when I turn it on. As soon as I turn it on, it goes directly into the now loading screen. I get a little bit of a hum, which isn't unusual, but it doesn't do anything from here. Normally it should continue to give us this set disk card screen. So it tells me there's something wrong with this disk drive in here that we're going to have to look at repairing. So I'm going to show you how to open it up. Turn that off. I'm going to show you how to open it up, how to look at repairing the disk drive. Often there's a belt that needs to be replaced. Those wear out over time, and most likely this whole thing just needs to be cleaned up, re-greased, and we'll see how it goes. So to get into this thing, first thing we're going to want to do is remove the screws. There appears to be what looks like 7 screws on the bottom, all of which are Phillips head screwdriver screws. So just using your basic Phillips screwdriver, you can get to work on removing all 7 of these screws. And when they're out, we'll flip it over and take the casing apart. So all of these screws, they're fairly long, and they're all the same. So when we put these aside, again, kind of make a mental note of what these screws look like, but they should be fairly obvious. There's not going to be any more screws that are, I don't know how big those are, 2 to 2.5 inches long inside. So we can set those aside. We can flip the console over, and the top should lift straight up like that now. So be careful when you do, as there is a connector here which goes all the way up to this motor. Oh yeah, so this is a, what is this? To be honest, I'm not even sure what the point of this piece is. This right here is the little mechanism that will switch between, oh yeah, okay, so that's a, this is the switch that moves between the Famicom and the disk system. So this little piece right here must detect that and tells the system what it wants to do. So we're going to disconnect this connector right here directly from the board. It should just pull straight up, but it's not cooperating. There's a little release on the back, I think. There we go. Oops. Alright, so now that that's removed, we can set this off to the side. I might give this shell an overall clean, but it's in pretty good shape. Mainly just going to need a dusting at this point. So what we're going to do now is take a good look at the insides here. A couple of things we want to look at, we'll zoom you in for this, are these capacitors. So these, especially here on the power supply, are they bulging at the top? Are they leaking anywhere? Look for any signs of residue or leaking from capacitors. A good thing to do before you go too far into these is turn the power switch on, just right here on the side. Turn it on, and that helps to discharge any built-up current in these capacitors. They can store a little bit of a charge, so that if you were to touch something inappropriately or touch the wrong part, it could actually either transfer current into you, which usually isn't enough to hurt you, with the exception of possibly in the power supply area, but it is enough to hurt some of these chips, so we definitely want to check for that. So looking at all these capacitors, I mean, at first glance they seem to be okay. What we're going to do here is really just start disassembling parts. So we're going to take all these connectors off the board, and they should lift just straight up. So there are connectors here that will connect the disk drive to the main board. There are connectors that connect everything to the power supply. So just slowly start pulling them up, and I'll be back once those are off. Okay, so I've got the connectors mostly lifted off. This yellow one here, this is the LED assembly at the top. It detects when the disk system is reading, and this is actually just going to come up right with the board, so I'm not too worried about that. Next is going to be removing the screws. So, like I said before, I'm mainly aimed at getting the screws off the, or getting at the disk drive here. So I'm going to start with those. I'm going to disassemble actually everything, as I do want to give this case a thorough clean, but the primary goal right now is going to be this disk drive. So there are 4 screws surrounding the disk drive assembly. There's 1 in each corner, so we're going to lift those up. And now we should be able to lift this whole drive unit directly up. There's one last connector on the back here which connects it to the power and data cables, and we're just going to remove that. And this is what we have. So this is the Famicom Disk System drive assembly. They use the same drive on both the standard Famicom Disk System as well as the Sharp Twin Famicom. So whether you're using an original or not, or the Sharp, either will work. So just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a look at that. We're going to get into cracking this open and some things to look for first. So it's been a while, and I finally had a chance to get back at tackling this Sharp Twin Famicom. To be honest, when I started this part 2, I think it was about June or something, so now January, so hopefully we can get this tackled. I had to order a few extra parts and order a few other games, so I want to kind of do a quick update for myself as well as everyone watching on where we currently stand with this. So, power it on, and we get please set disk card. So I do, and now it goes now loading, and it kind of just sits there. It doesn't show any errors. One thing that I've been told to check out is this switch right here, which its job is to recognize when the head moves all the way back, so it knows to, I guess, move it forward or what it's looking for. So you might have heard there's a little click when it does trip, like that, and there it was again. So that's supposed to indicate that it's reading something. However, it doesn't seem to be recognizing anything here on the system. So what I'm going to try and do now is take this all apart again. I'm going to test this switch to make sure that it's behaving properly as well as everything else, and if necessary I might just completely disassemble this drive, re-grease everything up, kind of test every connection just to see if there's a fault somewhere. So I'm going to disassemble this one more time, and when I have it apart I'll show you what we're looking at. Okay, so we have the disk drive taken apart here, and what I'm going to be focusing on right now is this section here, which has these 3 switches. Now, these switches, their job is to recognize when the drive head is all the way back or all the way forward. Basically, it recognizes the position of various parts of this drive. Now, I want to make sure that these are actually working properly. So what I'm going to do basically is just test it with my multimeter, flip the switch, and make sure that it seems to work. So got to kind of get a good spot, just like that maybe. Yep, that should do. So I'm assuming when I touch, these are the contacts of one switch, and I should have no continuity. When I hold the switch down, I should then gain some continuity. And so flicking it with my finger down here, you'll notice that it seems to work properly. Perfect. So same thing with this one. I'm going to test this switch the same way. That seems to be okay. Now lastly, this one. This is the big one that kind of pokes up right beside the head that you can see. So that also seems to be fine. So I was really hoping that one of these switches just wasn't quite registering and it might be an easy fix, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So where I'm going to go now with this is checking from the switch, try and run it back to these pins here and see if I can find any maybe breaks in the circuit. That could be a next thing to check and try and find some point of failure here. Okay, so one thing I think I want to try is actually having this open like this. I'm going to turn it on, put a disc in, and I'm going to try just manually pushing these switches. I want to see if this will cause any different behavior. So let's check it out, I guess. Push the power on. So set discard. I'm going to start with this switch. Doesn't do anything. This one, so this switch right now, nothing. This one also seems to do nothing. Now there is one more switch right here on the side, so I'm going to try, as soon as I do that, it starts running the motor in here. So it's basically simulating that a disc has been inserted. So I just let go and it's saying error 1. So let's try put an actual disc in. So the motor should be running. Try just kind of triggering any of these switches. Still not getting anything. That's kind of just what I'm doing there. So still nothing. So I'm starting to wonder if maybe these switches aren't, like I'd mentioned before, these switches maybe just aren't getting to these pins here. Wonder if it would be something that simple or not. So going to require a little bit more investigation, but fingers crossed on this one. Okay, so one other small thing, well, not necessarily small, but one thing I also noticed is when I just did that test, I hadn't connected this wire back onto the board, and that is actually what connects the board to the read head in here. So it is possible, and I mean, since the behavior that we got was exactly the same as the problem before, I'm now suspecting that either this wire is bad, the connector is bad, or there's a bad connection inside at the read head, as it's not getting any signal from this head. So, I mean, I could try clean the head again, but I want to try see if there's a way to test this wire and see if that perhaps could be a problem. So, I guess gotta keep plugging away on this. So, the one last thing that I want to try before we disassemble this yet again, I think that would probably be the third time now for this drive, is just giving this drive head another clean. I don't remember if I did that back when I was working on this last or not, but it can't hurt. So to do this, using Q-tip, some rubbing alcohol, well, actually isopropyl alcohol, not rubbing alcohol, so 99% stuff. Just kind of gently rubbing up and down and across this head. The idea being we want to remove any type of grime. It looks pretty good, but I don't know, we'll do it anyways. And the other thing you want to check, make sure that there's the little felt pad right here. We want to make sure that that's still there. It doesn't hurt to take something with an edge. You can use a knife, but I like to try and just use something kind of flat just to kind of scrape it a little, make sure that there's no other stuff stuck on there, dirt, sand, whatever. Just helps to make sure you're getting a good bond. And this will help push the disc down onto that reed head. If I look through it, I mean, when it sits in that position, they are touching, so that should be good. So I'm going to put this together gently and see if that happens to make any difference. I have my doubts, though. So give that a test, see if anything changes with this. So far, nothing. Still getting that now loading screen. Wonder if I gave it a little more pressure. Didn't seem to do anything. So, I'm gonna say it's time to disassemble this whole thing and see if maybe a really thorough cleaning and test of basically the whole board. I want to test all those circuits, see if there's any breaks, see if there's anything not connecting properly, and I don't know, fingers crossed, hope we can get something to work. Okay, so I've got it all disassembled here, and I'm going to show you what I want to focus on right now. So I'll zoom in just for a second, and you see these rails right here? Attached to those rails is a bunch of old dirty grease, and this grease is there so that the this little slide moves nicely on them. What I want to do is go in and clean those rails off and then replace that grease with some new grease. So I have some white lithium grease, which is supposedly appropriate for this type of work. So what I got to figure out here is how to actually get these rails free. I see that there's a screw there. Let's zoom out. I see that there's a screw here, and then there's a screw there, which is kind of hidden. And then there's one here, here, and here. Now, these ones here, I have no idea how to actually access. This whole slide mechanism would need to come up, but the problem is when I flip it on the back side, there's no real way to do that. These aren't screws, they're just kind of posts, which are, oh, and this came off somewhere. I think just from right there, so I'll put that on top of the spindle. That's probably important as well. So that would have came off this spindle right here. So put that back into place so that it's all right. And I guess try and unscrew a couple of these and see if we can loosen this enough so that these rails can come up. Yeah, right there. So this one I should be able to lift up. Yep. And what I'm going to do with this is just going to clear it off with some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip. I don't want to actually put that down on this mat because of the grease, so I'll put it right on this piece of paper. Yeah, so that seems to be cutting through the grease nicely. Clean my fingers off as well. And cool. Hit it with the dry side, just take a look, see if there's any residue, and nothing. So one of them's done. I'm going to try and repeat with as many of these as I can access as possible. Alright, so I've got two out of these three. That's my dog deciding to play with a ball right over here. So anyways, I got two of these three bars out. This one here I really can't access, so what I had to do instead using a Q-tip is just kind of try and get in there as best as I can. I do want to try and absorb as much of that leftover alcohol as possible. Now, in addition, I want to go back and basically clean up any case of grease that you see. So they got grease on these little diagonal rails right here, along underneath these sliders here. Basically anywhere where there's moving parts, there should be some grease in there. You want to be careful not to get the reed head either greasy or touch it too much, and you don't want any grease in these switches, but otherwise really can go to town. So that's basically what I'll do. Same thing on this little mechanism here on the slide, just in these screw holes, try and get in there and clean up as much of that grease as possible, because we're going to be applying new grease very shortly. Now, additionally, while I have this slide up here, I do have access to these terminal points underneath here. Oops, you're out of view. To these little terminations under here. So I want to make sure that this cable is still intact, that we're getting a proper signal from one end to the other. So I'm going to try, hopefully, it looks like this is covered in some sort of epoxy. Hopefully that I can get a reading off any of this. Not right away. I'm going to try scrape a little bit off, not much. So give you an idea of what I'm doing here. I put some old resistor legs into this connector, and by holding my multimeter to it and touching a certain point, I'm getting an appropriate signal. So I've done that for all four of those here, and it seems to be fine. There's actually 5 wires, but only 4 connections here, so I'm personally not positive where the 5th wire goes. Doesn't look like it terminates in there, so either way, I'm content saying that this connection is fine. So now that I've tested that, let's work on putting it back together. So let's kind of get it aligned the way I like. So I'm going to basically do it in the opposite order of how I disconnected it. So grab one of these bars, stick it through this guy here, and then place it down, and then I need to screw that into place. So use the proper size screw, maybe screwdriver. Some of these are kind of tricky to get at, so I had to really kind of wedge a screwdriver in there and just kind of hope for the best, but it seemed to work out. Well, I'm going to try and work on this one here. I think you're just out of view. Problem I'm having right now is this little bottom screw. It's just not going in nicely. You got to kind of play with it a bit with tweezers. So I'm going to try and I'll get these back on and then I'll show you the next step. All right, so now these are all back in place. So it's time to install some new grease on here. So I'm using white lithium grease, which doing some research, either this or ceramic grease works well for gears and rails, things like that you'd find on floppy drives. So I bought it for that purpose. So you don't need a lot. Usually what you can even do, just kind of get a bit coming out the end and just dab it in place very lightly where you think you're going to need it. That's even too much. So try and scoop some of that up. Then I'm going to put a little bit on the rails, a little dab on the top, and a little dab on the bottom. And then, all I'm going to do from here is just run each of these parts up and down, let them work the grease in. And same thing here. Run this up and down the rails, kind of giving a little bit of pressure each way so that the grease gets picked up. And it should slide nice and smoothly now. Should have some nice action, very little resistance, if any. Check on the other side. You want to make sure that grease is going all the way down. Down here, I think we actually could use a little bit more, but not much. Top side is good. So I'm going to put a tiny dab on the other side here, just right there. And maybe a tiny bit right there as well. And I think that's good. What you want to make sure that you're not doing is getting any grease on any pulleys or the belt, that is bad. But, so this seems to be moving nicely. As well, I'm gonna get a little bit of grease on these diagonal slides right here. That's too much again. Oops. I got one that I didn't quite clean off properly. And as well, a little bit on this pole here, as this is where the tray that holds the disc goes up and down on. That should be good. So now I'm going to begin reassembly of these gears. So now that we're on to the gears, I grabbed this one here, and again, these gears may have some grease and buildup on them, so you can clean off the little the gear teeth here. Do a general inspection to make sure that there's no broken teeth as well, as that will give you problems when it comes to reading games. Then once again, we're going to put just a very small dab of lithium grease on the small gear. I always, it's recommended just put some, if there's two gears touching, a big one and a little one, put a couple dabs right on the small gear and it will help spread it around the best. Okay. So now, when time to reassemble this, put a washer in between each of these different layers, And this will go on like such, so that this metal piece is at the top, and then the pulley here is on the other side. Then at that point, I'm going to put another washer over top. And it should just sit, I believe, should just sit like so. Sorry, that's on the wrong side. It needs to go on the underside, so flip it over and should sit just like so. There we go. It should be able to twist and then stop at a certain point here based on where this slide is. Like that. So now that this gear's back in place, what we want to do now is wipe the pulley part with some more isopropyl alcohol. The reason being, if you happen to touch this at all, you don't want any grease to be on this surface, which is going to be touching the pins. Not a bad idea. Also, just kind of wet your fingers with that a bit so that you can clean those off. Now, I found a new method to try and do these belts. So I'm going to try this way. See how it works, I guess. But what it involves doing is aligning the pulley here a certain way before actually installing the belt. So what you're apparently supposed to do is, I'm gonna line this up the same way so I'm looking at it right. So put the belt around this part just like so, and see where this large hole here is in the metal right there. You want to align this pulley so that the hole and so that both these holes line up perfectly. So this one and this one. And then it should, I believe, get in place somehow. So what we're doing is lining up these three posts with the holes on the board here, or on the casing, and just kind of hovering it over in place. There. You want to align this so that that hole is right in the middle, and then we can lift that off to the side. So now we place this portion to the side here, trying to get these gears to sit nicely in place and trying our best to keep this wheel in one spot, and then rotating it all counterclockwise and lifting up until we can get the holes to line up on top of this post. Probably should put a washer in there first. So I think I'm gonna do that. Let's put washer right there. So let's try and do this all in one take. So the method here, what we want to do is just put this over top and lining up these three posts with these three screw holes and the spindle over top. We want to have this hole right there line up with the big hole in the metalwork. So I think that should be about good right there. So then, putting this off to the side, we can now kind of work it in, just like so. It should sit in place like that. So we have that hole, it's in place, and it's aligned with those screw holes. So now, the job is going to be to get this belt around the pulley. So everything's kind of locked in place here, so this can now move if we needed to. But we want it to be, you want to grab it gently. You don't want to tear it or cut it or anything like that. So get it kind of in place around that pulley. And then it's going to reach down around this one. And I like to kind of give it a couple spins just to make sure that it's moving freely. You do not want it to slip, and you don't want it to be kind of crossed over. So if it's twisted or anything, you're gonna have problems when you try and run this. So now we have that belt in place. So now that we've got that belt installed, it's time to put this board back on. So what you want to do very first thing is reattach this connector to the board, otherwise it's not going to work. So on like that, and actually no, sorry, it's supposed to go through this hole on the side. So it goes in there. I don't worry about getting it under these hooks that are there right away. I can do that later, but I like having a little bit of extra freedom with this cable so that I can move it around as necessary. Then, very gently, you need to get everything up over the top here and in place here. You want to be careful that you're not pulling on these wires here and ripping them off the board. And as well on the other side, this switch needs to come up through this hole. So there we go. When it is in place nicely, everything should just sit nice and flat. So switch it over, grab this switch here, make sure that it's not underneath this slide, turn it back over, and as we can see here, something's still just not quite right. There we go. So I'm going to put one of these screws in place right now, and then we'll screw in the rest of this mechanism, or the this triangular bit here. All right, so let's get this all lined up. It is important that this is straight, because if it's not, you can actually wind up with the switches not being read properly. So you don't really want that. There's 3 screws remaining, and the one with the smallest screw head goes in this location right here, actually hooks up to this little triangular hub. And the other 2 can use regular old number 2 Phillips, and they just attach onto the housing here. Okay, so flip this over. What we have to do here on this side is install this little hub here. Now, if you notice on the back, there is a spring, and I didn't know this, but the spring has to be oriented so that you can't depress it from the top. So we're going to put a washer on there, and then if I push this down, it doesn't do anything. So that's the correct orientation. And I'm just going to tighten this a little bit. We're still going to have to go in and adjust it later, but apparently this method is easier method of adjusting than what we've been doing previously. And I understand you can push this down as far as you want. Apparently doesn't make a difference, so that's like that. The next step is going to be reattaching this black top piece. So to do so, we lift up the little guide here, push the eject button, line up the post, these posts right there with these holes, and there, it's sitting in place like that, and then reinstall the springs. So now the step is going to be aligning this spindle here. So let's see if we can get a good view of that. There you kind of see it. So I have it here so that I can see this set screw. So I want to loosen that screw just enough that I can move it. Whoops. I apologize that you probably can't see this very well. Maybe I can turn on a flash. Let's see. There, so turn on the flash. So you want to get this set screw here. You want to loosen it just enough that you can move this. There we go. Now, you want to kind of hold that in place and turn this unit on its side. So now what you're going to do is, it needs to be loosened a little bit more because I'm getting too much resistance here. That should do the trick. You want to be very careful that you don't lose this set screw in here, as if you do, good luck finding something to fit it. So now we want to move this gear here so that that hole lines up with this bar right there. So slightly more. It's pretty sensitive, so it doesn't need a lot. Jeez. Just like that should be good. Actually, slightly more. I think that's about perfect. So now that I have that in the position I want, what we're going to do is holding that in place, whoops, and almost not doing what I just did, push this little set screw all the way down. I want to make sure that we're still aligned. Just like that. Get a hold of it with your Allen key. There we go. And you want it to be pointing directly forward at you. It should be good right there. Make sure this is still aligned. And it is. Just like that. So holding it just like so, we're going to tighten that. You don't want it to be super tight, but tight enough that it's not going to move. So that should be coming straight out, and this dot should be aligned. And apparently this also calibrates the system. So let's try plug it in and see, maybe this is the last thing we need to do. Okay, so I got everything kind of reassembled here. It's not screwed in, so I mean this is open, but should be able to do a functional test of this. So let's turn it on. Set discard. So let's go with Mario Golf first, and fingers crossed. Still more of the same crap. Just to be sure, let's try a different game. So this is Othello. Never played it, so hopefully I can play it right now, but again, I have my doubts. This is side B. Put that in. Still the same problem. So, I don't know where else to go with this, so I guess back to the drawing board. Alright, so I went and I bought a Famicom Disk System, and I'm going to try and firstly see if I can use that drive in here, and if it works, that tells me that this circuitry is all fine and there's an issue with the drive here. And then, for fun, I'm going to try and figure out what component in here has actually failed. So, I've hooked up just a regular Famicom cartridge, and it seems to play fine. Let's unplug it. You can say hi to Kona. Yep, there goes the tail a little bit. She likes getting screen time. I know you guys like seeing her. You keep asking for her. So let's try Disk System. So it is going back and forth. And again, still the same, now loading screen. So let's get out of that. And we'll hook up the Famicom Disk System. Okay, so we got it hooked up here. Let's see what happens. So please set disk card. Cool, so we're going to try the same disk here. I'm going to start with side A. Right, goes in this guy. So this is supposed to be working. Let's see what happens. And that loads right away. So I'm going to try swap these drives and see what happens now. Okay, so because I really don't want to move everything, I'm just going to do this down here by my TV. But Famicom Disk System, the actual console here has 6 screws. They're fairly small screws. They look like this. So, or actually no, that's a case, that's a screw from inside. They look like this. So they're way in these holes. You need a pretty small Phillips screwdriver to get them. But once you get those 6 screws out, this top should just lift right off. Here we've got the battery compartment and the disk drive. So we're going to remove the mounting screws on the side here. And probably have to remove this battery compartment. And we should be able to lift this straight up and out. And then we will try swap the drives. Okay, so these are the 2 drives side by side. And at first glance, they honestly look absolutely identical. The fronts are the same, the bottoms are the same, even the mounting plates are the exact same. So I think they, for the most part, just reuse the same part and just put it in a different system. So that makes it easy for me. So we should be able to just plug this in, and assuming that all the circuitry here is fine and there's no breaks in these cables, this should work. If it doesn't work, that tells me either these cables are one of them must have a break in it somewhere, so it's not getting the signal into the board, or some chip here has failed, in which case it's going to be difficult trying to troubleshoot what the problem is with the board. So I'm going to hook it up and let's see what happens. Okay, so the moment of truth again. We're going to use the same game, Othello. Throw it in there. Actually, turn it on first. Okay, I forgot to flip the switch, so that's why I was getting a gray screen. Set disk card. Now loading. It did not take this long on the disk system, so clearly the drive is not the problem here, it's something else. So the next tedious job is going to be going through these cables, testing continuity on every single one of them. So something I'm definitely not really looking forward to. So stay tuned, I guess. So one last thing I do want to check out before I wrap this up is to see if the drive that originally came in this system, which I've repaired, or I think I've repaired, I've replaced the belt and realigned it and everything, and stuck it now in here, if it will work. So this drive right here, if you go back, check the serial number 6H9D. That was the one that I pulled out of this system. So I want to see that my belt adjustment actually worked. So let's fire this up and see what happens here. So set disk card. And if it didn't work, we should get an error code. Hey, it booted right in. So that's pretty good. So, I mean, in this video, at the very least, I've shown you a couple of ways to recalibrate the belts on these, but still have not isolated the problem with why I cannot get this to work. So, I'm going to cut this video off at the end here at part 2, and hopefully part 3 I'll be able to solve the problem here. I'm hoping it's just this ribbon connector, but I'm going to have to go through, do some tedious work tracing each of those connection points, and find out if all the signals are properly making it onto the board, and if it does, maybe one of these chips is causing a problem. I'm sure part of it is supposed to emulate the RAM adapter, so it's possible that some of these chips are no good. That's going to be a little trickier to diagnose, but that's going to be part 3, so this video doesn't turn into a 2-hour marathon. So thanks a lot for watching. I wish I could have got this out sooner and with a better outcome, but unfortunately, still some work to do here. Appreciate you watching. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. If you have any ideas that I haven't done yet, please, by all means, leave it in the comment below. I'm struggling to try and figure out what the problem here is. So, appreciate you watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button below, and we'll see you next video.